Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, brings smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I got a question for you. Do you got some time and some interest to learn about some new music? Well, I got 7 to satisfy. Yep, I'm starting a new series tonight. If you haven't watched my new channel update, let me just give you a quick rundown. This is basically the same idea as if you haven't heard, but instead of doing 5 albums, I'm going to be doing 7. Hopefully I'm going to be doing 1 video per week, maybe 2, depending on what time I have. But basically, with this series, I'm going to be going over every single album that I listen to throughout the year. No more 1 to 2 albums reviewing a week. This is going to be the basis to be able to review every single album that I get to listen to, no matter how much information I have on it. Let's get going with tonight, and I'm super excited for this one. This one is going to be covering a lot of albums from the end of March, but there are going to be a lot of good ones in here. And we're going to be starting with a new 9 Inch Nails album entitled Ghosts 5 Together. Now this is the 10th studio album from Cleveland, Ohio industrial rock band 9 Inch Nails. I absolutely love this band, though I haven't been as keen on their latest work. Their EPs over the last few years haven't really scratched the itch that I've had. It hasn't been since Hesitation Marks that I've really enjoyed something, but out of nowhere I found out that Trent Reznor had put out not 1, but 2 new Ghost albums. The first one being Together. So of course I was super excited to check it out and see how it came out. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the first 4 Ghost CDs, but I think it's because I didn't really understand it during the time. I definitely would love to go back and check them out, because if they're anything like number 5, then I'm in really good hands with these albums. What I really enjoy about this one is this album name states the idea of this album so perfect. The idea of being together. There's a lot of optimism in this album. A lot of very close and very warm songs. These ones are pretty simplistic, letting the atmosphere build rather than being very complex in the melodies. And honestly, I didn't know I was missing this type of sound from them. The minimalist approaches are done very well with simplistic yet super effective melodies and layerings. The first song I love on here is Together. It's super simple and it never really hits a dynamic peak, but it ebbs and flows so well. The simplistic piano and guitar parts work so well together, while the chord progression is absolutely gorgeous. The best chord progression on this album in my opinion. Just a beautiful journey. Next up, With Faith, also super gorgeous. Reminds me a lot of Ice Age from How to Destroy Angels, one of their side projects, with the instrumentation sounding very similar to that. The main melody builds and adds so much complexity over the time, while the atmosphere becomes grandiose without really swallowing the rest of the song. Another highlight on here, Apart, which is the perfect pairing to Together. It even uses most of the same ideas in the chord progression, but there's more tension and dissonance in the chord progression itself, making this a little bit more haunting. Makes sense. Together being close and Apart being a little bit more disjuncted. I also do love the string and flute parts added to this song. Your Touch, short but has so much power. Love the chord progression. The mixture of strings and piano and electronic melody make for a complex yet rich sound. Even though it's one of the shortest songs, it still leaves an impact. And then Still Right Here is an eerie closer with a beautiful piano part. Interplay of consonants and dissonance is wonderful. It eventually opens up to this part with electronic percussion, guitar, and bass boost. It kind of feels out of place at first, but I think it kind of hints at the darkness of what the next album is going to be bringing, especially when it drops back down to piano. Yeah, such an interesting way, in my opinion, to end a beautiful album, though there are still some minor hiccups. This album is 8 songs and a little over 70 minutes, so you're going to be seeing that there are a lot of very long songs. The problem there is that sometimes these feel a little bit too stagnant, even for the minimalism that they deliver. Letting Go While Holding On nice opener, setting the tone for the atmospheric music that will be coming on this album. The optimistic music is a nice touch, and I enjoy the chord progression, but it doesn't do enough over the 9.5 minutes to keep me fully engaged. In particular, that ending lingers a little bit too long in my opinion. Out in the open, also a little bit stagnant, switching between two chords for most of the song. The chromatic piano is a nice touch, as well as the ebb and flow of dynamics, but it's a little bit too stagnant to be a highlight. And then finally, Hope We Can Again. Nice vibe and chord progression, but again, has a problem with stagnation, and the static is also a little bit grating. However, for the most part, beautiful. So in my opinion, it is definitely worth a full listen. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more serene, a little bit more peaceful, builds well, and honestly is great background music, this is a perfect album for you. Absolutely love what 9 Inch Nails is doing here. And don't go anywhere because we still have to talk about the second one. But first, we gotta get through some other albums. Next up, we got Aporia from Sufjan Stevens. So this is a collab album between Sufjan Stevens and the stepfather Lowell Brahms. Also another artist that I hugely enjoy. I think Carrie and Lowell was one of the better albums of the 2010s. And The Age of Az is also a phenomenal album in my opinion as well. Love the closer Impossible Soul. One of my favorite long form songs ever. You know, even though it's like 20 plus minutes, it keeps me engaged throughout. I also enjoy his work on the album Planetarium, I want to say it's called. Also a really cool idea. But of course, when I heard that Sufjan Stevens was putting out a new CD, really excited. Would love to see where he would go from Carrie and Lowell. But what I did not know at the time was this was supposed to be a new age album. Now, from what we were talking about with Together, with it being 8 tracks and 70 plus minutes, each song is going to be really long. Flip side, we have 21 tracks here, and it's about 40 minutes worth of material. So you already might see a problem here. There are some good songs, don't get me wrong, especially when the ideas are fully fleshed out. Most of them bring me back to that Age of Az sound. What it takes, one of the more fully fleshed ideas, and I love the Age of Az style electronics, eventually moves into a more atmospheric piece and a nice touch at the end, though it feels like the main idea could have just been a tad longer. Agathon is a slow burn for 2/3 of the song in the intro and the outro, but it picks up interest in the middle of the piece and makes the rest of the song worth the burn. Afterward Alliance continues the Age of Az vibe. I like the overall vibe of the song. I even enjoyed the fake out fade. It honestly got me a couple times on here, making for another highlight. Glorious You, short but very sweet with a mixture of electronics and string parts. I like the overall swell of the song. Ataraxia is short, but I enjoy this really spacey, atmospheric vibe. It's something that's not really shown much on the album, and it makes it for a standout song. The Runaround is probably the most complex and layered song on the album. It even has vocals and drums. Crazy, I know. It's not always engaging, but it is one of the better songs on the album by far. Kind of the Mountain is one of the more rewarding songs on the album. Love the atmosphere, love the keyboard parts, and especially love the build. The emotion flows through the chord progression and its use of tension very well. And then finally, for my highlight songs, Cats in Praxis, solid upbeat groove. Really enjoyed the bass line, one of the more fun songs on the album. Now you would think with 8 tracks being highlights that this is going to be a pretty decent album, but the problem that happens is that almost all the rest of the album feels like half-baked ideas. When you have a lot of songs that don't even reach the 2-minute mark, it doesn't leave any sort of effect on me. And then there's actually one song that I actually just can't stand, which is weird because it's literally the shortest song on the album. For Raymond Scott, somehow in just 30 seconds becomes a super annoying piece. Absolutely annoying. The worst song on the album by far. As much as I like some of this album, I can't recommend it to everybody because I feel like so much of it is just incomplete. So in my opinion, this is worth a pick and choose. And those songs are What It Takes, Agathon, Afterworld Alliance, Glorious You, Ataraxia, The Runaround, Climb That Mountain, and Captain Prasix. I really hope that eventually Sufjan comes out with something just his own. It's been a little bit since he's done it. It's been since 2015. So I'd love to see what he can finally come up with himself. All right, next up we have Cenizas by Nicolas Jaar, the fourth studio album from Chilean-American composer and recording artist Nicolas Jaar, a person that I've never checked out but have heard about him so much on Anthony Fantano's channel, whether it's Nicolas Jaar or Against All Logic. So finally, when I saw that he was putting out another album, I wanted to check him out for the first time and see how I would feel about his work. I think I came honestly into this album in the wrong mindset the first time because I didn't really enjoy it that much. I think it was just a little bit too monotone and a little bit too slow burn in my opinion. But when I came back with that idea, I started to really enjoy what was there. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a perfect album, but I do enjoy a lot of what this slow and methodical burn is. It's really passive, and if you can deal with that, then this album has a lot to offer. Starting with Vanish, it starts off with this dark atmosphere. I love the minimalist approach and how it eventually turns into this beautifully dark vocal section. I can't really describe it. It reminds me of James Blake in a little bit of a way, but it also weirdly feels like, okay, picture being in a cave and like hearing the echoes of like a haunting vocal. That's where like my mind goes to, and I just love how that happens. Going from this very minimalist approach to something a little bit more warm and inviting, but in a sinister way, makes for a beautiful opener to this album. Many-Side continues that minimalist approach, starting with hushed vocals, again reminiscent of James Blake or King of Limbs era Radiohead. Once the tinny electronic percussion splashes come in, the song settles into this trancy groove that I just really enjoy. And what I actually also really love about this album, I don't even know if it's original. This isn't my type of music usually, but I was really enjoying the use of different ideas that I'm not used to. Like again, that splash idea, it kind of sounds like, you know, like water coming off a stalactite and like falling down and hitting a puddle. That to me is really cool. I'm not used to that in any sort of music, so I thought that was pretty cool. Cenizas, the title track, also pretty awesome. It's an electronic ballad, pretty haunting, especially with the reverbing Spanish vocals. It takes a long time to get into the meat of the song, but once it does, it makes up for that burn. Gochi is also really engrossing. I find this to be a really fascinating song. This mixture of woodblock percussion and erratic out-of-tune piano passages with the steady 2-beat bass line on the piano makes for this weirdly hypnotic song, and I just absolutely enjoy it. And then rounding out my favorites on here, Garden, which is a super peaceful and nice contrast after the jarring Rubble, which we'll get to pretty soon. The piano melody reminds me of FK Twig's A Thousand Eyes, which, oddly enough, I really found this really fascinating, is that I had no idea that Nicolas Jaar worked on FK Twig's latest album, so it might not be a coincidence that it sounds like that. But what also sounds really cool, in my opinion, is this kind of like, not post-tonal, but like post-modern approach with the piano being overlaid and eventually one of the overlays being slowed down a little bit or brought out a little bit. So then you start hearing this echo and this reverb that slowly gets more and more out of sync. Never really been like an atonal, post-tonal kind of person, but this actually is really interesting in my opinion, and just shows off some of the experimentation on this album that's really cool. However, there are some experiments that have some good intentions, but just kind of miss the mark. For example, Augusto keeps the minimalist vibe, but the bassoon melody is kind of annoying and takes me away from enjoying the song. Mud has a solid trancy groove. The drums hit hard in the keyboard section, eventually opens the song up a little bit more, harking back to Goshi. However, the song feels a little bit too long and not having enough interesting material to keep it up for 7 minutes. Vassier, kind of basically an atmospheric interlude. Sunder being a little bit too trippy with overlapping whispering voices mixed in with some optimistic organ parts. Not bad, but just kind of weird. Hello Chain is a little bit discombobulated. I like the idea of each part. The vocals, again, were at the beginning reminding me of James Blake, but it feels a little bit different from the other section, which feels a little bit more Kid A inspired Radiohead. Really peaceful. I just wish that the combination of those ideas worked a little bit better. Xerox, super strange, starts off with this hum vocals, piano, and electronics. Eventually, everything else drops out except for the electronics, making the rest of the song kind of a drag. And then the ender, Faith Made of Silk, it feels a little bit odd as a closer. This is the only time where Nicolas Jaar uses very energetic drum set percussion. And it's nice and has solid layering and solid fills, but it kind of takes away from what this album has been, the very slow burn. And it's kind of unfortunate that it's the lasting memory from this album. I just wish it was placed somewhere else. It would still feel out of place, but it wasn't the lasting memory. But that's not the most frustrating song. In my opinion, there's one that tops that, and that is Rubble. It's kind of like Augusto, but it's even more annoying with this squealing alto sax melody line. But what drives me even more insane is throughout the song, it sounds like he's adding these sound effects of the pads opening up and closing again as he's playing the sax melody, but it's like really repetitive and really quick, and it reminds me of like when I used to play tuba, I would have to clean out the spit valve, and it's like that sound, and it just is so disgusting to me. I don't want to hear that in an atmospheric song like this. Most of this album is still pretty solid, so I still gotta say, worth a full listen. If you enjoy a slow burn like this, and if you are fine with not much resolution in terms of energy on some of these songs, then you're going to enjoy this. I still like the pensive, passive, slow burn enough to go back to this again. Number 4, we have The Common Task, the 4th studio album from Baltimore avant-garde rock band Horse Lords. This is another band that I got to know about from Anthony Fantano. The idea of this avant-garde math rock jazz idea really caught my eye and my ear, so I was loving to check this out. This album is 40 minutes long, a little bit over 40 minutes long, and 5 tracks. So you're going to see another album with a lot of longer songs. And for the most part, pretty solid album. When this album is on top of its game, it offers solid grooves of interesting layering and subtle and creative subdivision ideas. Both Against Gravity and People's Park are my highlights on this album. I love the slow build of a lot of both of these songs. Against Gravity has this really solid 6/4 groove with so many interesting subdivisions and use of dissonance. What I love is just the slow changes throughout the song, and not always with every part. It's sometimes just one part changing and then another part changing, almost like as if they forgot to switch over to the part, so it's like, okay, now I'm going to do it. Love the drive, love the overtone guitar work, and the end is also really cool on that particular song. People's Park, again, another fun, energetic vibe. Bass and drums stand out for its rhythmic steadiness, while the guitar line is absolutely hypnotic. What I love more is the arrangement's subtle way of using subdivisions. Again, so cool to go on this journey, even if the end gets a little bit weird. But honestly, sometimes the subdivisions can't save this album. For example, Fanfare of the Effective Freedom, interesting opener. And I love when the song eventually gets into its 5/4 groove, but the beginning of this song gets a little bit weird at times with the subdivision. It sounds kind of clunky because you have the guitar doing like a 4/4 idea, and then you have the drums doing like this triplet idea, and it just doesn't match super well. So for people who aren't used to this, you're gonna feel like this is completely clunky. Same thing with Integral Accident, a song that does eventually get to an interesting point. You know, it's an 18-minute song, but this isn't like piano burning from clipping. There's a lot more activity, but it does take some time to get into it. It's not until you get like halfway through the song where everything kind of melts together and you get fully engrossed. And unfortunately, in an 18-minute song, it's kind of hard to get yourself into this completely. And then Radiant City, interesting experiment, electronically enhancing a bagpipe track, kind of reminds me of the piano pieces from Liturgy from last year. However, the piece is more often than not comes off as super annoying. So unfortunately, it's hard to really fully recommend this album? Honestly, I would go pick and choose, in my opinion. I think there's enough on here that's really interesting, but personally, I could only really recommend Against Gravity and People's Park. Still not a bad album. I would come back to those pieces easily. There's a lot of really cool stuff. I just wish that the cohesion was a little bit better. Number 5, we have Underneath. 4th album from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, hardcore, punk, metalcore, industrial hardcore band, Code Orange. Been super excited to review this one. I actually was going to do this as my last Are You In, but I thought, why not just put this in with all these other great albums this time around? Checked out Forever from a few years back. Wasn't a huge fan of it. I saw the potential there, but I didn't understand the acclaim that was happening with this album. Also, don't confuse this band with Blood Orange, though I understand where, that happens. I've done that before. To me, they're both two bands that I never really understand the appeal of, but I finally understand it with this album. Underneath is the polished material that I was looking for from Forever. This album hits so hard, but at the same time does so many interesting things throughout the album to keep me just entertained and satisfied. Starting off with Deeper Than Before, it perfectly starts the feel of this album, the dread that's going to be coming in, but the slow descent of it. And then you get into Swallowing the Rabbit Hole, which has some really cool production ideas. It's pretty standard metalcore song riffs and all, but there are some really cool glitch ideas throughout the song. What really piques my interest is these sudden moments of no sound. The first few times I listened to it, it's like, is there something wrong with my headphones? I don't know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, it just comes back in. And I finally realized that it was the production, which is so cool. I know that Anthony Fantano wasn't a huge fan of it, but personally, I really enjoy that. It catches me off guard every time. You and You Alone, another heavy-hitting song, reminds me a lot of Gojira on the main riffs of the song. Also love the cymbal work, the drum work, just is so primal. Erase Your Scan, also very hectic. Kind of reminds me of the Dillinger Escape Plan song before getting hard and heavy with some punk undertones. It amps up the creativity later on with some fast-paced electronic ideas before getting back to a metalcore breakdown. However, the rhythms here are super interesting and offbeat, making for, another standout idea in the metalcore sound. I also really enjoyed the looping idea at the end. Reminds me of Clipping, reminds me of Liturgy. Really cool ideas. Also, Back Inside the Glass is another song that stands out for its hectic nature and ends with this pretty solid breakdown, but I enjoy this one because it's short and it's sweet, as sweet as a metalcore song can be. But what also stands out this time around is the clean vocal song. They are more polished and they are more interesting. This time around, I finally can get into their voices. I had a hard problem with that last time around, but Reba's voice is really solid on here, and so is Eric's voice. They aren't the most beautiful voices, they aren't the most powerful, but they fit the vibe of what this band is trying to be. Dirty, grimy, a little bit off. And it shows up through all of these songs. Who I Am feels very 9 Inch Nails at times, and I just love when it finally kicks into the main riff with this more alt metal hard rock vibe until you get to the screams of Lock Me Up and the active drums and complex Chinese signatures. Absolutely hell of a song. Sulfur Surrounding, in my opinion, best song on the album. It's such a short song, but such an interesting mix. Starts off with this acoustic ballad with almost an 80s vibe in the production for the guitars. And then there's some nice overtone touches in the guitar work as well. And then you get some really powerful attacks on the phrases, like when I'm coming through the choo-choo. Really cool idea. Then it picks up intensity before getting to a bridge that glitches in such a simple yet effective way. And then it softens into this more twisted bridge that's kind of reminiscent of Enter Sandman before going back into the main idea. Overall, the best clean song on the album. There's also some other ones. The Easy Way, pretty straightforward industrial metal song with vocals from Eric. It does overstay its welcome just a little bit, but I love the power of the whole entire song. The drums remind me very much of Trivium, while the glitch ideas remind me of Liturgy. You also get the straightforward Autumn and Carbine, the most straightforward hard rock heavy metal song. Not the most interesting, but I think it works because it gives you a reprieve from all the other hecticness on the album. I also get a Sliver, which has the best chorus in my opinion. What I love about it is the production with it, because the second half of it, it adds this haunting laugh, probably from Eric, and it just is so cool. It also has this really cool glitched out dubstep section. It comes back around at the end, and I don't really think that they need it, but the first time around, really cool. And then underneath, as this super industrial metalcore closer, it kind of gets kind of formulaic in terms of the metalcore ideas. Like, I could definitely hear a lot of metalcore bands doing this song, but I still love the intensity on it, and there's a lot of really cool ideas to make it stand out. That being said, there are some songs that just miss the mark. In Fear kind of is all over the place with its pacing and its vibe. Cold Metal Place is really heavy, but it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of activity to keep me interested. And then last one's left is hectic throughout most of the song, but at this point in time, it's kind of more dime a dozen with the metalcore vibe. That being said, I'm 100% sold on this album. Love it, absolutely love it. If you have been trying to find a more polished Code Orange album, this is your time. Worth a play on repeat. So many great songs to keep you engaged throughout, and so many interesting ideas that keep you engaged in sometimes formulaic material. Next, we have Gigatron, 11th studio album from Seattle, Washington, alt-rock, grunge, hard rock band Pearl Jam. Not my favorite grunge band from the 90s, but I enjoy some of their work. I like Backspacer. I liked Lightning Bolt from 7 years ago now. Crazy. But, you know, there was stuff in the early 2000s that I wasn't a huge fan of. So, you know, I was hesitant with this album. To be fair though, I enjoyed a lot of this. There's a little bit more experimentation from this band that I haven't seen from the last couple albums, but there is still the rawness and garage rock energy that I've enjoyed from previous couple albums. Songs like Whoever Said, Quick Escape, Never Destination, and The Long Way all use great energy, great garage rock, anthemic rock ideas, and they're just a lot of fun. Whoever Said stays a little bit too long, but I love the infectious energy. Same thing with Quick Escape. Kind of reminds me of Rush's Headlong Flight, even though that song's a little bit more about all the drunken debauchery that they've done over the years. And this one is about trying to get away from Trump's craziness. Still enjoy most of the energy on there. Though, in my opinion, Never Destination and The Long Way are better garage rock songs. Love the use of 7/4 throughout most of the song on The Long Way. Arrangement is short but in your face, and the chorus is so much fun. Same thing with Never Destination. Great garage rock energy, but it feels more in your face than Whoever Said and Super Blood Wolfman. Also really enjoy Vedder's vocals on here. Gives it the grit that some of these other songs don't have. There's also some great experimentation and some really somber yet effective songs. All right, smooth and minimalist throughout most of the song. Eddie gives this beautiful and soft verse melody. The chorus does give it a little bit of extra oomph from the minimalist verses. Also enjoy the lyrics about taking care of yourself and doing what's right for you, especially very poignant during this time of isolation. Another experiment on here that I love is Dance of the Clairvoyants. Did not expect a Talking Heads-esque song on here. Absolutely enjoy it. Some of the best drumming, some of the best layering on this album. Eddie Vedder does his best David Byrne impression, and it works very well. Love the pacing on the verses. The chorus is great. I love the layering of the vocals on the end. Overall, makes for the best song on the album. Hands down. Ending all the highlights, Retrograde. Love the ebb and flow of this song. Love the mellow and serene vibe of most of the song. And it builds to a beautiful end. However, with all that being said, there are some ones that overstay their welcome. And that's where most of the problems lie. There are some songs that have still some great vibes, but just are a little bit too long to keep you entertained. 7 o'clock, beautiful chorus, but unfortunately the verse comes off a little bit too simplistic and repetitive. Comes and Goes, absolutely gorgeous. I love the storyline about being still in love with somebody or thinking about somebody that you've missed, hoping that they still think about you, and like the ebb and flows of those feelings. It really pulls at the heartstrings. But as beautiful as a lot of the song can be, it's not worth a 6-minute song in my opinion. There's just not enough complexity there to keep it going. Same thing with River Cross. Beautiful ending to it, and it's a nice closer, but it kind of just starts a little bit too slow to get you where you need to be with that ending. And then Super Blood Wolf Moon has a different problem in my opinion. It just feels a little bit too raw and rough around the edges, particularly in some of the production and on the bridge. Also, the bridge verse of "She was a star and I am stunned." Blech. Yeah. Then you also have Buckle Up. Beautiful vibe. Apparently it's about a serial killer. I don't really see it, and if it is, the lyrics are a little bit too bare bones to get that message across. But honestly, as beautiful as a lot of this is, as beautiful as the guitar work is, it kind of puts me to sleep, making for a little bit of a lackluster song. If it had just a touch of energy, I think it would be good. Overall though, came away thoroughly impressed with this album. There are some songs that I just aren't hugely interested in, 7 o'clock, Super Blood Wolf Moon, but even with some of these songs that overstay their welcome a little bit, I think it's still worth a full listen. Very surprising in my opinion. I did not expect myself to be so engrossed in that album. It could be one of my favorite rock albums of the year, but we'll definitely have to see. You know, it's only April. And finally, I can't let you guys go without talking about the other 9 Inch Nails album that dropped, Ghost 6 Locusts, the 11th studio album from 9 Inch Nails, the partner CD from Together. And this one is a little bit over 80 minutes long. So an even longer CD, but luckily this time around there's 15 tracks. So it gets to be spaced out a little bit better. And some of these ideas get to still shine through and be longer, but there's enough here where some smaller ideas can work as well. So altogether, you have about 2.5 hours worth of material if you're going to listen to both. If you had to pick between the two, Locust, in my opinion, is the better one. Hear me out. As much as I love the beauty of Together, there's so many beautiful and trancey and atmospheric and meditative songs. I just love the atmosphere on this one so much more. There's so much more complexity. There's so much more demented energy. The dissonance is more interesting. It's a little bit more erratic, more complex, and more experimental. It makes for more diversity, and it feels like more of a journey. There's also so many different uses of instrumentation that it makes for a very interesting ride. You're on edge throughout this whole entire album, but it's kind of what you need. We start off with the Cursed Clock, which sets the tone of this album so well with this atonal and habitually pounding piano part. It almost feels like you're watching a demented clock in a horror movie. The song shows off the contrast between this album and the previous album so well because it also has so much more melodic complexity. Also, there's so much atonal work on this album, which is, you know, something that I've never really been interested in, but it works so well in the grand scheme. Around Every Corner, absolute slow burn, repeating the same dissonant piano line for most of the song. However, there's enough twists and turns and additions to make this 11-minute song interesting throughout. The horn parts are solid addition, something that wasn't on the previous album. The flattening of the piano even is a kind of a nice touch. It's a surprise, didn't even expect it, but it was so worth it. And then you have this really cool marimba melody at the end to give those songs some brevity. Then you got the Worriment Waltz, a more melodic and inviting than the previous two songs, with this beautiful piano part combined with a sweet but haunting trumpet melody line. But it doesn't get to stay, like with everything on this album. It eventually bubbles up into something very sinister, culminating in the static and bass boost effect before dying out again. Another slow burn, but definitely worth the ride. Then we get something more in your face like Run Like Hell. This main idea has accented driving electronic parts that remind me of How to Destroy Angels. There's also an eerie trumpet part as if it was chasing you. Eventually a drum kit comes in while the trumpet is still in the background howling. Eventually the drums die down, yet the sound continues with the unease of the accented electronic parts. Truly a worthwhile song. Then you get this hectic When It Happens, Don't Mind Me, which is like the perfect snapshot of when someone snaps and there's like this erratic beauty behind it. The song is sometimes hard to tolerate with its high staccato dissonant notes, but with it only being 3 minutes long, it never becomes truly unbearable. Also, it kind of reminds me of the Twilight Zone melody, so there's a plus there. Another Crashed Car, another short plaintive piano piece with the use of dial tone and stalled car in the background, really sets that scene well in such an effective way. Trust Fades, another piano piece, but this one uses a lot of contrary motion and not in opposite ways, but moving inward. So you get some consonant ideas, but you also get some dissonant ideas. It makes for this really weird yet cool piece that's really dreamy, really interesting to listen to. Really Bad Night, another simple piano ballad. I like the sedated atmosphere here mixed with the tension coming from the static in the background. Your New Normal, also really zany and really interesting in a haunting way. I like how all the parts form together to form this weird product. Stuff like dissonant piano mixed with electronic bass, mixed with what sounds like glass that's been played by a spoon, and then a vibraphone being run out. And then there's even some trumpet there, making for the super strange yet fascinating piece. Turn this phone off, long song, but the atmosphere and energy and ebb and flow sucks me into it and makes the song breeze by. You almost forget that it's 13 minutes long with just the energy. And then Almost Dawn, it's a beautiful yet sobering way to end this album. It starts off with this beautiful marimba part and eventually transitions to something more mechanical and bass boosted, yet weirdly human. It kind of reminds me of a heartbeat that's quickening, caused by anxiety. And then the boost drops out going back to the marimba part, yet you hear the heartbeat in the background and it never really goes away. I think this is a really cool allegory for what's going on right now. Both Together and Locust are the light and the dark of this whole entire coronavirus epidemic. I feel it a little bit more on Locust, in my opinion, just like how real everything is. And there's so many songs on here that just feel real and feel visceral. And honestly, even like the ones that I'm not a huge fan of, I still understand their place on here. I mean, Temp Fix is a quick piano piece using the bottom end of the piano. It's a nice idea, but it's gone too quickly. But Just Breathe and Right Behind You and So Tired, for their titles, the music makes sense, though I'm not a huge fan of all of them. Just Breathe is the most atmospheric song, and it feels pretty apt for the title, but the problem is that it just gets a little bit too simplistic, and even the piano line isn't that interesting. So in my opinion, for the 7-minute song, it doesn't really do much. Right Behind You is another short, intense piano piece. It's starting nice and then turning dissonant, as if someone was getting closer to you. It's effective, especially the abruptness at the end of the song definitely caught me off guard, but it feels a little bit more of an interlude than a fully fleshed idea. And then the music behind So Tired makes perfect sense. It's a little bit dissonant, and the piano's flattened a little bit, making for a weird off feeling that you may feel if you're super out of it. However, as someone who has perfect pitch, I'm not a huge fan of the auto-tune piano melody. That being said, amazing album. Locust and Together as a companion piece work so well together. Some of the most interesting music that I've listened to all year. It's a little bit too long to be able to be play on repeat, so I guess I gotta say, play the full album. If you're a 9 Inch Nails fan, neither album is going to leave you dissatisfied. I've been weirdly waiting for this, and I'm so glad that it came out during this time because it's just perfect for what we need right now. In terms of my rankings, number 7 is Aporia. Honestly, not really worth your time. There's way too much songs on there that are not fully fleshed out, so I cannot give it any sort of positive rating in my opinion. Number 6, I'm going to go with Tom and Task. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there, but there's way too much of it that doesn't just work well, especially with an 18-minute track that takes way too long to get into. I can't be super pumped about that album, so that's my number 6 spot. Number 5, we have Senazas. This is where the middle gets a little bit tricky, but I think Senazas gets this 5th spot. There's a lot of really interesting and slow burned ideas, a lot of passive songs. It just, some of the experiments don't work out fully in my opinion, so it just gets a little bit lower. Number 4 is Gigatron. Really love the comeback from Pearl Jam. Done a phenomenal job. Yes, some of the songs do overstay their welcome, but a lot of the ideas are cool enough that I at least enjoy part of it. Number 3, we have Together. Love so much of that album, so good. But there are a couple times where the songs are a little bit too long and a little bit too stagnant, in my opinion. Number 2, we have Underneath. Phenomenal outing by Code Orange. One of the better albums that I've heard all year. Yes, sometimes it gets a little bit too formulaic, and that's why I put it number 2, but so much of it is interesting. Definitely worth your time if you're looking for glitched out metalcore. Number 1, of course, though, we gotta go with Locust. Phenomenally interesting and visceral and real album. Like, as much as I love Together, this one is just a little bit better because just how raw and real and how off everything feels. Just like what's going on in the world right now. Right now, it's really up there as one of my favorite albums of the year. Could easily be the best album of the year. I still have to figure out a lot, but that is my thoughts. Thank you so much for watching this first one. Yeah, it's a little bit long, but I hope you watch all of it, and I hope you got a lot out of here. Let me know which albums you love and which ones you hate. Let me know other albums from 2020 that you'd like me to review during this time. Share this with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel. That way I know that you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see the channel become bigger and better for the future. I'll be back later on with another one of these 7 Dissatisfied, hopefully a little bit shorter. But until then, this is a Music Fan, and I'm signing off.